At Beyond Borders, I'm talking to Sir Menzies Campbell, former leader of the Liberal Democrats, former Member of Parliament for North East Fife, and now an observer, in a sense, of the political scene. And this is an encounter here at Traquair where people discuss the tides of politics and how things change. My goodness, how things have changed. How do you see the political scene now?
Well, it's almost exactly a year since the referendum. And if after the referendum had been won by those who wished to preserve the Union, anyone had said, look, in the general election to come, the SNP will get 56 seats and David Cameron will be returned with an overall majority. No one would have believed that for a moment, nor indeed would they have believed that immediately the Labour Party would have been put into turmoil. And it seems to me that in a way perhaps we've not seen for a very long time, politics in this country are completely in flux. It's very difficult to make predictions. Indeed, if you make predictions, there's a risk that the men in white coats will come and take you away.
What lies behind that flux? Is it fundamentally, at a very practical level, the decision that your party made to go into coalition with David Cameron?
I don't think that helped. And although, as I think we've said before, you and I had reservations about it. Once we decided to do it, it was necessary to do it in the national interest. I think you've got to look outside the United Kingdom. You've got to look at the advance of right-wing parties in some parts of Europe, and then take Greece in particular, the advance of a left-wing party. There's a general disillusionment with the whole notion of the established parties. And it's the phrase which Farage throws around, the metropolitan elite. Mark you, it's a bit funny for him. He went to a public school, he worked in the city, and it looks as if he's just stepped out of the pages of Country Life. But notwithstanding that, he has managed to convey this notion that somehow those of us who go to Westminster are completely isolated from the rest of the country.
But the reason that he's been able to purvey that notion is because people sort of believe it in the first place. Isn't that the point? That perhaps because of the advance of social media, there is a natural distrust in authority. There's a kind of feeling that if it's said officially, it's wrong. That everyone's deceiving us. And, you know, it feeds into the whole child sex thing and so on. And in that respect, it's terribly difficult to be an established political figure at the moment, isn't it?
The information revolution has been quite extraordinary because the fact is that people now have access to information which even 5, 10, 15 years ago they had no question about, no understanding about. And of course, it feeds on itself. And I heard one of your colleagues say the other day, the big problem about these social media outlets is people only talk to people who have the same views as themselves. Yes. Yeah. But I think there's a little more to it than that. First of all, MPs' expenses. Second, the decision by Tony Blair to take us into war against Saddam Hussein. Still a gaping sore for Labour, unless and until the Chilcot inquiry is published. And when you look at these things, which 25, 30 years ago might not have been so readily available to people with an interest in politics, it's perfectly clear that having found that, and having been, if you like, admitted to that knowledge, people are by no means willing simply to accept it in any kind of obvious or unchallenging way.
There's a great paradox here, isn't there? Because people say, we want the political system to deliver. And anybody who's looked at the process of decision making for 5 minutes knows that that has to involve a certain degree of confidentiality, of frankness behind closed doors. And that runs counter to the idea that everything's out there. Now, here, Beyond Borders, there are all sorts of people here who've been involved in, you know, negotiations, international negotiations. We've seen it in our own country in Northern Ireland. You couldn't have reached the settlement that Blair reached with the Good Friday Agreement without a kind of, what the critics would say was a secrecy in politics. Now, how in the current climate do you defend that?
I think you have to defend it. I mean, one of the interesting issues, as you know, is now this question of security against privacy. The extent to which the three security services are entitled to seek information about people like you and me, and whether privacy is such an immutable right that any infringement of that somehow is wholly contrary to our political values and to our democracy. And that, of course, is not going to go away, and it's going to get worse, because what we forget is the pace of change always accelerates. And if you take your mobile phone, I mean, 20 years ago, it was a brick. If you're very lucky, it worked about 5 times out of 10. Now with your mobile phone, you can talk to the world, and you can get information from all over the world. Now, if you think of that kind of technological advance, there's no doubt that that has invested the public with a far greater degree of access, and they don't like what they see. With 25 or 30 years, they might not like what they saw either.
And that raises a very interesting question about the obligation of those in public life and in Parliament particularly. And you mentioned the MP's expenses fandango of a few years ago, which, was a horror for people in Parliament, whether they were ensnared by it directly or not. It means that we need to have people in Parliament who are able to cope with these big questions. There is a general perception that the quality of people standing and being elected for Parliament is dropping.
Let me give
Do you think that's true or not?
Well, let me give you an exact parallel. In the days when Harold Wilson sought the leadership of the Labour Party, you had Healy, you had Crossland, Crossman, Barbara Castle and Jenkins, by any stretch of the imagination, commanding political figures. Indeed, if you read their own autobiographies, they'll tell you quite how commanding they were.
Yes.
Now, all credit to the 4 candidates who are standing at the moment. Not one of them would fall into the same kind of category. Now, is the explanation the fact that they were older, the fact that they were all involved in the Second World War to some extent? I just think it's because Healy, who of course created this notion, you must have a hinterland. They had a hinterland, and the problem I think about many politicians, I don't entirely exempt myself from this because I'm a lawyer, I'm in a kind of cloistered profession. That's what I did before I went into the House of Commons. But for many people, they don't do anything but politics. And there's that old thing by, was it C.L.R. James, the Caribbean philosopher? He said, what do they know about cricket that only cricket know? So what do you know about politics? I don't even, if you only know about politics. And on that basis, it seems to me, we're looking for people with a wider sort of definition. The problem is, though, that because of the crisis of expectation, that people imagine that solutions are available to every problem, then the criticism for individual members of Parliament, again, fueled by information, is very severe. And I don't think there will be many people like me, who will have done 28 years in the House of Commons, or Kenneth Clarke, who's even going on much, much longer. I think people will come in for a couple of parliaments and then leave, and the result is there will be very little of a kind of corporate memory of politics. And of course it's based on what you've experienced and what you've seen in politics helps you to make judgment about current events.
And that's a bad thing, isn't it?
Indeed. It's a bad thing because to be a member of Parliament is to be seen, to be embarking on a kind of professional ladder. When I first got in 1987, there were lots of what were called rather dismissively the Knights of the Shires. They were all people who'd been in the war. There was one man, I remember, Conservative whip, who had a very badly disfigured face because he'd been a tank commander, his tank had been shot, and he was one of those that McIndoe, that great plastic surgeon, had put together again. And there were people like that on the Conservative side. Julian Emery, for heaven's sake, was still in the out of Churchill's war cabinet. And on the other side, there were a lot of people, trade unionists, and they'd been in the army as well. And there was a kind of cross-party
shared
experience, which was very important to them, and they understood each other. And you know what their ambition was? To represent their constituencies. The problem now is people come in and they think if they haven't become the parliamentary undersecretary for refuse collection, then somehow their career has been a failure. That, of course, to some extent fueled with the fact we have far too many ministers. I mean, you could argue it far too much government. I mean, the ministerial payroll is enormous now compared even to what it was in 1987. And of course, if there are opportunities, And people are denied these opportunities for one reason or another in their own party. And here's where the coalition had a great effect on the Conservative Party. Then you get a lot of dissenters. You get people to say, well, why am I not in the government when these damned Liberal Democrats are? Plus the fact, I think, to be particularly concerned with the Conservative Party and the Conservative government, there are 60 or 80 Conservative MPs in the House of Commons now who would rather be out of Europe than in government. When I said a moment or two ago politics is in flux, I mean, that really doesn't describe it. You could, if you take a sort of Manichaean view of the world, think it's chaos.
Sir Menzies Campbell, thank you very much.